Hello, my name is Rich Howard, owner of Architectural Builders Supply, and this video is to bring you a closer look at the Bommer, part number LB4383-400 in a 652 finish. This is a single acting spring hinge, and this is one of a very comprehensive offering of spring hinges available from Bommer. Not only in single acting, but double acting as well. They have an incredibly comprehensive offering of this material. And what I mean to infer by that is Bommer manufacturers hinges for different manufacturers of doors. And what I mean to say by that is the location of the holes. When you're dealing with 4-inch hinges that are residential, you're going to have lots of opportunities to obtain the hinge that you need for the templating that you require for your holes. There probably are a dozen different patterns of this that you're going to see on 4-inch hinges. And be mindful, if you're dealing in a residential application, that you have a spring hinge that you need to replace, that you might want to take a study in terms of where your existing are, because there are lots of opportunities to purchase the wrong hinge. This hinge is a Taylor compatible model. Taylor is I don't know anything about Taylor. They are either still conducting operations, or maybe they're not, I don't know, but the hinge that they would use on their door and frames would match these locations. Not very common that we sell a Taylor prepped hinge, and how we know that it is a Taylor prepped hinge is because of the 4383 in the part number. So let's dissect the part number. LB4383 is a LB stands for Lube bearing. It's a maintenance-free type of construction of bearing from the manufacturer. 4383 specifically tells us that it's for Taylor, and that again refers to exactly where these holes are for the hinges. Now the 400 in the part number, that tells us that the hinge is 4-inch tall and 4-inch wide. The important distinction to make, because while this hinge is a square, basically, it's 4-inch tall and it's 4-inch wide, and that's how hinges are measured when they're laid open. But the important part is the height is the first dimension. You can get by not having to deal with that if you're always dealing with 3.5, 3.5, 4x4, 4.5, 4.5. But if you get into the world outside of that, like a 4.5 by 4, that's not an unusual spring hinge. 4 by 3.5, that's not an unheard of full mortise hinge. You could easily find 5 by 4.5 on large hollow metal doors. We've done 6 by 5. We've done 8 by 6. We've done 5 by 8. Either taller than wide or wider than tall. So the height is the first dimension. Okay. Now, this is the 652 finish. That means a couple of things. That means it's made of steel, number one. Number two, it has a satin chrome finish on it, and it has a touch of lacquer on it as well. Okay. Now, an interesting note about spring hinges, and let's just tackle it because it's right here in our face. Listed. This is a product that is not only listed, but it's also labeled. That means that this hinge bears proof and evidence that it is approved for use on fire-rated doors. And an interesting fact is fire-rated doors must be self-closing and self-latching. They must be free-swinging as well. Self-closing is obvious. It has to close on its own. Self-latching, same thing. It must mechanically engage the frame according to the requirements of the label. If you're using spring hinges on fire-rated doors, NFPA 80 states specifically that that hinge must bear visual evidence that it is a listed product. It must bear a label that indicates it has been tested and found to meet the requirements of the fire test. I've received orders from clients for hinges, and we've get into the conversation about what are you using it on. Well, I've got a fire-rated door in my house. Hold up. The hinge that you've purchased does not, a client would, ordered it from a home center. There's no fire rating, there's no labeling, there's no listing that's involved. So technically you don't have a hinge that's fire rated, which means you don't have a fire rated door and frame. The problem with that sort of setup is you want that door to be closed and latched in the time of a fire, proven to be part and parcel to safe, to providing life safety from fire as much as possible. So be mindful that the code literally calls that out, that you have to have a product that is a labeled product. Okay. Now, let's move down into the extended description of this video. Okay, now moving into the extended description a little bit, we're going to see it's a full mortise hinge. You can see from the swag on the hinge leaf here, better seen really here, it's the same on both sides, how this curves like this. That means it's a full mortise hinge, so that when the leaves are brought parallel, they're meant to be mortised flush to the door and frame, okay, allowing you to have that typical margin between a door and a frame. This is ANSI rated. This is UL listed and labeled for use on fire rated doors. Non-handed, you can certainly install these for left-hand doors. You can install them for right-hand doors. Self-lubricating hinges, that's the LB of the part number. That means that you're getting a very high quality, a very well-engineered product that should give you decades of faithful service, in fact. Easily adjustable spring tension. This is a spring collar that's up here, and we're going to talk about that spring collar and how to adjust the tension during the course of this video. Special template hole location, and we're going to dive into the different hinge locations that are available, hole locations that are available as well. Designed to fit standard hinge preparation of Taylor doors and frames. Pivot point aligns with residential butt hinges from 85 thousandths to 109 thousandths. So very commonly, a client has a hinge that they want to replace, or both of the spring hinges, or maybe all of them, whatever the case might be. You can mix and match this hinge with other hinges, provided that the leaf thickness is between 0.85 and 1.09 thick. This hinge actually measures 0.96 according to the manufacturer. Let's put the caliper on this hinge. 0.099. So yeah, right there. That vertical axis of pivoting needs to be compatible, and as you go with a different thickness of hinge outside of that range, it's not going to work correctly. And of course, you have to be using a 4-inch wide hinge as well that will permit a plumb vertical axis of pivoting, a line, an imaginary line right down through the center of all of the center point of the pivoting axis. Made of steel, we discussed that. Now this has a 5/8 radius. That is a radius on the corner of that hinge that is 5/8. So that is 1 1/4 inch diameter. And how that's achieved is when the manufacturer is routing the doors and frames, they are using a router bit that's 1 1/4 inch diameter. Those certainly do exist. They're like wing cutters. It's a two flute, thin 1 1/4 inch diameter that's specifically used for the door and frame industry. And why a large bit like that is used is because it's less work. You can have a square corner, you can have a 1/4 inch radius and a 5/8 radius. Well, if I take a 5/8 radius with an 1 1/4 inch diameter bit and an 1 3/4 inch door, I only have to move my tool like that, and I'm completely routed. And if I don't go back and square the corners and leave the radius, that's it. So quick, fast, and easy, low labor. And a lot of clients will look for this radius and not realize, it's just the radius. You could order square corner hinges. You'll just square out these corners. But that's why this exists, along with the 1/4 inch radius. That's still the same tool path as a square corner hinge, but you are not going back and squaring out those corners. And that's hard to do in an automated machine sort of scenario. So when the automated machines run and those routers move, if you're not going back to square out those corners, then you're leaving them and needing a radius corner hinge. Now this hinge has 8 holes in it, 4 per leaf. It's going to include screws. This will actually include more than just screws. You'll get wood screws, and they're going to send you all machine screws as well. You could be installing these onto a residential type metal frame, maybe a snap-on casing style frame, a timely frame, a ready frame, and many other people who make that material. You see them in hotel, motel applications all the time. This is also going to include the hardware that you're going to need to get the door and frame set with tension. For every order that you place, you'll have a tension rod, and for every hinge that you order of this style, you'll have a tension pin. When we get to the tension setting, we're going to talk about exactly how that is all set and where you use those. There's a table down below that discusses how many hinges and the weight of the door that you would need when you're calculating how many hinges to purchase. First of all, only up to 3070 doors. Nothing bigger than that would be permitted by the guidelines of NFPA 80. Doors larger than that can, by definition of the standard, not use a spring hinge. You'd have to have another means of closing the door. NFPA 80 is a standard. If the standard is referenced in your local building code, it becomes part of the code, and that's where up to 3070 must be listed and labeled is coming from. It's coming from NFPA 80. 2 spring hinges and a regular butt hinge for doors up to 85 pounds. And if you're going to mix and match, be absolutely sure that you are using ball bearing hinges. If you have the requirement of 3 hinges on your door, which you will, make that top hinge, and 2 of them will be springs, make that top hinge your ball bearing hinge. 70% of the weight of the door is borne by that top hinge. Spring hinges are not load rated. They're not meant to carry the load of the door. When they're doing that job as well as closing the door, they're less efficient. So put your spring hinges bottom, middle, and bottom. Never at the top. You put them at the top. If you're doing all 3 spring hinges, they're all going to have spring hinges. But if you're doing 2, middle and bottom is where exactly you're going to come into play. If your door is up to 110 pounds, you'll be looking at 3 spring hinges. Okay, a link to the replacement tension pin and rod is down below. It is not unheard of for us to actually take orders from clients for just this material. Someone removed the tension pin. There's been an inspection by the authority having jurisdiction. The doors aren't self-closing. Okay, I need some tension pins. You will want to use the original pins in these hinges, and you can certainly physically insert other items into this, but there are known lawsuits where people have hurt themselves by making contact with an unusual item stuck inside of there to act as a tension pin. This tension pin is not going to break my skin, but if I took a 4-penny hardened case nail and cut it with aviation tips and stuck it in there and let it hang out a 1/4 inch or a 1/2 of an inch, and someone made contact with the back side of that, think of a fitting room where you've got 2 spring hinges, maybe just 1, and the parent is in the fitting room, the child is waiting outside, leans up against the back of the door and starts to move around. All of a sudden, you're not enjoying the benefit of the properly engineered product. So be mindful. Use the factory original material. That's the way it was tested. That's the way that it was engineered. Using anything else does not guarantee you that you're going to be compliant. Using anything else guarantees you that you're not compliant. And those links too are down below. We're going to talk about the other hinge patterns that are available. We're going to talk about the links down below, template, installation instructions, certifications, and hinge selection guide as well. So let's move on. Now what we will be doing is continuing on with what we said about determining these hole locations. If you click the link to the manufacturer's page as seen here, you'll come up to this page, and then you can pull up the Bommer product catalog, which is here. And if you get down to page SH8, Spring Hinge 8, or 7, SH4 has standard template design hinges on it, and then an overview of those. SH6 is where the residential style templating begins. And as you notice, you've got a different part number. Well, every different part number is going to have a different location of holes, possibly, a different combination of corner treatments as well. While it may not be obvious on the camera, this is an unequal leaf hinge. This is 4" by 3 3/4. And as you continue to scroll through, you'll get to the next page where you can see the different manufacturer's parts. Taylor has a couple of different options, 5/8 radius or 1/4". Now, the question that you'll have is, okay, great, well, how do I know which one to look at? Well, what you'll do is, from the website, you'll click Contact Us in the upper right-hand corner of the site. Then over here, you'll click Video Gallery. You'll scroll all the way down and go to page 2, and then you're going to find how to identify a residential spring hinge. From there, we have all of the templates available in this document, where if you simply use this document to narrow in on what you're looking at, you can just visually identify. Say that you're going to start with the corner treatment. Do you have square corner? Do you have radiused corner, 5/8? Do you have 1/4" radiused corners, as seen here? Then you can start to narrow in on a part number. Okay, this client was able to use this method to determine that he did indeed have the 4383 Taylor 5/8 radius. Okay, now let's close up these links and let's get back to our hinge. The template specifically for this hinge is here. Okay, you can review all of the locations of everything in terms of the locations of the screws, the thickness of the leaf, its dimensional properties in every regard, quite frankly. And this way you'll be able to determine if this is what you have in mind, or if this is what your application requires. Moving on to let's jump to certifications and hinge selection guide. This information will actually be, for the most part, on your box. Assuming that you receive hinges in a box, and they could be loose, but sometimes you'll need to refer to this information either on the box or back here at the link to the hinge selections and certification guide. That gives us an overview of some important facts. This is a grade 1 hinge. It's rated for 1,000,000 cycles. In fact, the gentleman's name, who you probably didn't notice on the template, Jackson, he has been working at Bommer for decades. I've known him for decades, and I've spoken to him and met him, and he's the gentleman who conducts the testing. And we were having a conversation about how many cycles the hinge actually passed, and I think he said, well, I don't know. We unplugged the machine when we hit 6.5 million cycles. So the point of the matter is this hinge is absolutely best in class. It's grade 1, which means 1,000,000 cycles. They just stopped testing it after 6.5 million cycles. These are its certifications. Uses. Okay, basically making a door self-closing is the bottom line. This is the important part about it being a labeled door. NFPA 80 requires a minimum of 2 hinges. They're not to exceed 3070 in height. Okay, I do not see the reference to it being a labeled product, but that is definitely in the NFPA 80 standard. For maximum versatility, use all spring hinges. UL listed spring hinges are not available with reverse springs. Okay, so if you're doing a fire door, you can buy a spring hinge as a reverse spring hinge. If you want a door to open until you push it closed, you can order those. But that, of course, defies a fundamental tenet of fire-rated wood doors. They must always be self-closing. Now, for maximum versatility, use all spring hinges. Well, the reasoning that that is the case is because I liken spring hinges to a tugboat. They don't go very fast, but they can pull a lot of weight. And in situations where you have air pressures that are challenging, you might have full 4 seasons where you live, where in the summer the doors and windows are open and you don't really need as much spring tension on the hinge versus the winter when everything's buttoned up. Having more spring hinges on the job will permit you to have more residual energy stored in the springs when you simply have more springs, because what you want to do is get the door closed. You want to get the door latched, but you don't want to have to turn up the spring tension so high that the door is in effect slamming closed, or you don't want to have it set because you don't have adequate spring stored energy on hand available to close the door, not be able to get the door closed. So if you are unsure of 2 or 3, opt for 3. It will give you the ability to more reliably, in a controlled sense, get that door closed and latched. And if you have a fire-rated door, your mandate is to make sure that that door closes and latches every single time it's opened. Non-labeled doors, maximum door width 4 foot. For doors over 7'6" in height, add an additional hinge. That's just a statement that refers to the height of doors in relationship to how many hinges. For doors up to 60 inch, you'll have 2 hinges. For every 30 inch after that, add another hinge. Well, 30 inch after 60 is 90, which is 7'6". 3.5 inch hinges, 4 inch hinges, 4.5 inch hinges. 70 pounds, 2 hinges, 90 pounds, 3 hinges. And you see how that works? That's where the 85 and the 110 come into play. When installing a Bommer LB4383 series with a butt hinge, we discussed that, how you have to be within range of your thickness. The LB4383 is a residential version, which would be obligated to meet this criteria here. Okay, you could have a contract or a commercial thickness hinge where that hinge is actually 130 thousandths thick. Okay, 4.5 inch hinges, 134 thousandths of an inch thick. So that is the hinge, the certification and hinge selection guide. Now let's move to the installation instructions, which are here. Okay, now we're going to move into the installation instructions. And the installation instructions are very simple and straightforward. We're going to look at the paperwork first, and then I'll demonstrate it, visually demonstrate it. So the important thing is when you see the tension rod or tension lever, as we mentioned earlier, when the tension collar is pointed towards the top of the door, you'll turn it clockwise. As you turn that clockwise, you're going to feel tension increasing. And into one of the new holes that you will reveal as you move that clockwise is what you'll drop that tension pin into. Okay, that's how you set tension. It's that simple. If you were to install this with the tension collar pointed towards the floor, just turn it counterclockwise. Okay, for every order that you place, you'll get 1 tension rod. For every hinge that you order, you'll get 1 tension pin. This is important. If your door goes to 180 degrees, don't set more than 3 holes of tension. Up to 90 degrees, you can set 4 holes of tension. Okay? Everything that's here is the written explanation of what I just said. And they're wanting it always installed with the tension collar pointed towards the top. That has everything to do with how the internal construction of the spring and how it connects to the rest of the hinge assembly on the inside in terms of the mechanical linkage between the hinge leafs, the barrel, and the spring itself. That's all been engineered according to it being installed at the top. You do see them installed otherwise, but this is the way the factory has tested the material. So now let's take a look at the actual setting of tension on the hinge. Now here we are with the real hinge, and that's your tension collar. Okay, install that towards the top. You're going to take your tension rod, just going to poke it out of the packaging here, and you'll insert it into that hole and then turn it clockwise. Drop your pin. This client ordered 2 hinges, so there are 2 pins, into one of those new holes. One hole, set it, move it over again, reposition the tension pin, and continue on. When you're installing this, I would simply just put, 3 holes of tension on your hinges, carefully test the door, and then make adjustments moving forward. I generally would find that adjusting the hinges towards the top of the door to be less efficient when it comes to closing the door because of the amount of weight of the door that they're sharing in terms of carrying the load of the door. So your best bang for your buck will be at the bottom hinge, I think, in terms of just getting a hinge to move, because it's got less work to do in terms of keeping the door off the ground, and it can do more of just this. Okay, so really simple and straightforward procedure. Hang your door, get your door tested, it closes, no problem, then set your tension, and then proceed accordingly. This hinge is available in a variety of finishes. Being made of steel, I'm sure we demonstrated that earlier, it can be plated in lots of finishes. Bommer proudly is capable of producing 33 different finishes. Now, they wouldn't be able to do 33 finishes on this hinge because some of those finishes require the base material to be different, like being made of brass or bronze. Now, as we look at this hinge, and it will be available in, it's listed in a lot of finishes. At least 20. To summarize, your brasses, your bronze, your chromes, your nickels, satin, polished, oil rubbed bronze, zinc, bright black japanned, prime coat. And again, because it's steel, if you want antique nickel, we don't have that listed. Nope, we do. That is a 648 finish. We do have that listed. 639. You can do lots of finishes from Bommer, and that is a hallmark of what they do. They have their own plating plant, their own physical building that is the size, that is tens of thousands of square feet, only for the process of plating their products. So suffice it to say, the finish that you're going to want is going to be available. And we'll just leave it there, is how that would be. Now, finally, there is a link below this video to the there is a logo on the hinge leaf, Bommer. And right above it, it says Made in USA, a fact that Bommer is quite proud of, as am I, to represent them. There's a link below this video to the manufacturer's page where you can pull up not only all of the Bommer products that we sell, but also a link to the manufacturer's website, as well as a link to the full product catalog. If you have any questions on the Bommer, this is their part number LB4382 in a 400 size and a 652 finish, or any other Bommer product, please feel free to reach out to us. And thank you.